Never been here before? I don't think you have?
I have.
You haven't? Okay. Everybody else has experienced. You're the only one. In no flash photography, please. In the event of a fire, which seems rather unlikely in a stone building, but stranger things have happened. That door pushes out, and we get out that way, and of course this is our main exit. Best idea is to go out the back so that the fire department can come in the front. All right? The other thing I'll mention is that we have historically had a bat. We haven't had enough poetry readings here to know how the bat feels about poetry. So this is a new experience both for the bat and us. If he or she does not like poetry or does not like these poets,
they go for my hair. I've had it in the house.
Yeah, but you're protected now. But they will go around and go out underneath the arch. We decided to do this for a number of reasons, but one is that it happens to be not today, but this year is 20th year anniversary of my father's death. So we thought it was important. Hard to believe, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
But that it was important to recognize that somehow. And there is no better way to do that than to use Lynn Hoyne's poetry. Lynn was a dear friend of ours, very gifted poet. You may remember, those of you who've been coming here for many years, that she was the box turtle. She took the money at the front for concerts. We always called her the box turtle, for the box office. Wonderful person. And so she wrote a book called Called by Stones, a chapbook they call them, which is for sale upstairs, and most of these poems are about Pacem and Terris and about Kluska and Frederick, and I'm even in there for a smidge somewhere or other. And so we thought it was an appropriate way to recognize both my father and Lynn, and that's why we're here. And we give it to Mike.
Okay, so Connie Carlo.
Someone's outside.
That's this one.
It is a good. Will you sit here?
No, I'm sitting there.
Thank you very much.
Connie Carlo was good friends with Kluska and told her that I was a poet she should read. And so Kluska started inviting me to come write. And it was a chicken coop at that point. And so that's how I met Kluska, and I would tell her when I was coming and going. And I was just telling Lukas that one of the times when I was leaving, and she said, "Oh, you startled me. I didn't think you were human. I thought you were a bunny rabbit." So, yeah, she was an amazing woman, and I was happy that she allowed me to be the poet that would come by and write script.
Kluska called her the poet laureate of Pacem and Terris. It's a very small poet laureateship, but we'll take it.
Hi, I'm Michael Piotrowski, and I first came here through my friendship with Lynn Hoyne. She brought me initially to music concerts, and then by being here, I experienced the sculpture gardens, which are on both sides of the railroad tracks. And eventually, I became familiar with some of Frederick's writings and his visual work in the galleries. When Lynn passed, part of what was written in the canvas about her passing was a quote from me. It said, "I sensed it but didn't know it when we first met, that she was for many and would become for me a dear friend, a mentor, an editor on call, an art buddy, a shining example of someone finding and following and practicing her passion, her right work, W-R-I-T-E."
Mike also recreated the banner that's hanging out front. He made this version of it. Recreated. Wonderful gift to us.
Originally designed by Franck. And I had a copy of his original drawing and notes to work with, so that was a gift.
I wondered why it was so clean.
That's one.
It is beautiful.
Almost still life. The old mill crouches on its haunches on the banks of the Waiwayanda as the river chuckles by. Patterns of gently swaying leaves dapple its ancient stone walls. Hopkins pie and beauty.
In the beginning, the Wawayanda flowed under the bridge, once covered, between the old mill and McCann's Inn and Tavern, called McCann's Saloon by the regulars. The covered bridge had been gone for years. The mill, a hulking stone garbage dump, open to sky, and McCann's Saloon empty, listing slightly to starboard, as if it had had too much to drink when the artist and his wife bought the old tavern in dead of winter, one of those creative impulses impossible to explain. Not until their house became finally habitable did they spy the remnants of the mill across the river. Once again, the artist and his wife fell in love with a place deemed unsalvageable. That was how it all began, on the banks of the Wawayanda.
Called by stones.
1.
Two old stone mills, miles apart, years apart, pulled me in, turned me inside out.
2.
The first, a relic open to sky, with crumbling stone staircase, hugging the one remaining wall, sat on the bank of the Mohawk River. If you dared, you could make it to the one remaining window, swing your feet through, and sit on the wide stone sill, 3 stories above the river. One afternoon I dared. Nothing behind me, nothing in front. I was almost a bird, perched, ready for flight. The warm stones under my thighs held me safely, suspended in air. I leaned my head against the side of the window and heard the stones whispering.
3.
The first time I came to Pacem and Terris, an 18th century grain mill resurrected by a Dutch Renaissance man, my senses pull slant. A wall about 3 feet tall rises like Lazarus out of the earth in front of me. Its winged bird roof perches lightly, ready to fly at any moment. My feet find their way down the stone staircase. My heart is pulsing in my throat. The artist's hand is everywhere. Serene Buddha face beside the Waiwayanda, stained glass windows painted by hand, heavy wooden door in the Renaissance arch, Romanesque arch, pivoting on a center axis, allowing only one person at a time to pass through.
4.
I thought I was coming to a concert. There will be music, glorious music. Scarlatti, Charpentier, Bach, that spirits me to a place only these stones can hold. But first, there is the open door.
5.
I step into a womb. My soul smote. I sink onto a bench. Try to hang on to something, anything. A quiet laugh wells up. I look around for its source. Shocked, it's coming from my mouth. Leaning back against the cool, damp wall, I feel its rough support through my dress. My feet anchor to the stone floor. I feel the stones breathing. My breath steadies to match theirs. As I open to filtered light, smell of candle wax, taste of living water, I hear the stones speak. Do not turn away from love's warmth for fear of sorrow. Not loving is the deepest sorrow of all.
The Wawayanda.
1.
At the end of a mild winter, weather turns Arctic. Temperatures plunge sub-zero. First, the river freezes only along its edges in frothy lace. But as the frigid drop stretches from days to weeks, ice becomes thicker, pushes out towards the center, until only a small, crooked channel remains open. How still the river is, its dance gone underground till spring.
2.
The thaw arrives suddenly. Great chunks of ice move huge boulders, change the look of the river. Sudden violent storms shoot enormous tree carcasses into the dam where they hang, teetering precariously. The river overflows its banks, flooding paths and icons by the meadow. On the opposite shore, the sculpture of the pierced hand holding the flower is completely surrounded by water, rising from the depths towards light as the river's voice roars.
3.
On placid summer days, where the boy once splashed in the swimming hole behind the dam, the river flows quietly, only spilling over after rain. Below the dam, the great blue heron, as still as his steel twin, waits for fish by the sluice, only his eye in motion.
4.
With crisp days and colder nights, trees turn color, reflected in river turned burnished and golden. Leaves drift down into water. Dancing yellow, red, orange boats tumble fearlessly over the dam on their way to unknown destinations.
5.
Drought or flood, the river runs wild and free, its sound playing counterpoint to our days.
Hobo stones. Hobo stones began to appear around Granny's farm in South Jersey. They had memories of the men who laid them down to rest, one on top of each other. Each one carried an intention, Property owners, fearful of bad luck, were not obliged to move them to scare away their magic. There were hobo stones. One had been bitten by a terrible black dog for weeks. The stone bled crimson. For days, the stone burned yellow. In cold weather, the stone ached all over, wishing for a milder winter. The stone beneath and the stone above worried, wary the dog would again break its tether. There were hobo stones. There were stones the wild grasses that surrounded them hissed at. There were hobo stones that hissed back. There were hobo stones that hissed back. There were stones that tumbled to the ground. There were stones that lost their direction. There were hobo stones that parted their skirts and danced at the full moon. There were hobo stones that ran to the next farm and never once looked back. There were stones that returned home, regretting their frivolous nature. There were hobo stones. There were stones that sneaked into the barn and slept in the hay. There were stones that loved to hear the lowing of the cows. There were stones that tumbled to the gully and found camaraderie on the next wall. There were hobo stones that guarded the children in the farmhouse. There were stones that begged the beaten children to run away. There were stones that begged the children to stay. There were hobo stones. There were stones that asked the other stones to play. There were stones that begged the other stones to work. There were stones that danced in a circle in the moonlight. There were stones that clung to each other in the steamy summer grass. There were stones that married and moved to the next town. There were stones that never ever left the wall. There were hobo stones. Granny listened to the stones and their stories. Often the stones didn't listen back, turned a deaf ear to her. As long as she lived in the old farmhouse her husband had built for her, stick by stick, there were these hobo stones. When her children grew up and moved away after her husband died, the hobo stones kept her company. She listened to them while she grew old and died herself. Then they stopped talking. Out of respect for her, they hurled their voices into the earth. But in 1915, there may have been 1 million hobos, and they needed to keep moving. There were hobo stones.
J.S. Bach, Partita No. 2 for solo violin, for Krista Benyon Feeney. She stood alone, feet planted on the mill's uneven stone floor, to one side of the mosaic of the tree of life with its prominent butter churn trunk. Violin tucked, she raised her bow. Without hesitation or fanfare, the notes ascended and descended Bach's demanding staircases. Melody, swirling a coronet around her burnished gold hair, rose from foundation to bird-perched roof until everyone and everything was bathed in it, consecrated by it. After the final downstroke, when the last notes became flakes of memory, silence held all for a moment. Then came the tumult.